I'm Dave Thomas, and today I am building the Cluster Duck mid-power model rocket by North Coast Rocketry. Now, as the name implies, this is a cluster-powered rocket. It has a single central 24mm engine mount and then 6 18mm engine mounts surrounding that. So this can be flown on a single 24mm motor, or you can have the 24mm and even numbers of cluster 18mm as well. So this, you can actually fly this on a wide variety of motors. Now the box is huge and kind of deceptively so. We'll go ahead and open this up. Okay, and mainly the largeness is due to the body tube itself. And so let's go ahead and go through the inventory here. Okay. They do give us some nice full color instructions here. Alright, so we've got a nose cone, body tube, 24mm body tube. Now this acts as both the motor mount, but it also acts as a stuffer tube, so the ejection charge doesn't have to try and fill the entire large body tube there. Okay, and then we've got a small parts bag here, which includes some water slide decals. That one appears to be self-adhesive. And a generic North Coast Rocketry sticker. We get 2 of those. Okay, and then we've got plywood fins here, a total of 6. Centering rings here. Okay, a small length of steel cable. This will be used to anchor the shock cord. Alright, and then they use a kind of a unique hybrid system here, where it has both a Kevlar and an elastic shock cord, but these are mounted in parallel rather than one to the other. Okay, we get a quick link, and then a whole bunch of little tiny parts here. Alright, so we've got the main engine clip, which will be for the 24mm motor. Okay, engine block for that. 6 16mm engine blocks. Get them all in there. Okay, we have 2 1/4-inch launch lugs. 2 little crimp connectors, and this is for that steel cable. And then we've got 2 little bits of heat shrink wrap here, and that will go over the crimped areas. Okay, so if we come back here, and it looks like we've got everything that's on the list. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and return most of this to the bag in the box here, and then we will get started. Our first step is to sand and shape the fins, but I just noticed this fin is not what is shown in the instructions. I contacted North Coast Rocketry, and they said they would send the correct fins as soon as they can. And so when I get those new fins, we will continue with this. It took about a week for North Coast Rocketry to send me the new fins, but here they are, and note especially this little tab in the front. This is going to lock into the motor mount later on here, so we want to be careful as we are preparing the fins that we don't sand this off or change its shape or anything. Okay, so we're going to start out here just kind of knocking down the corners. Now you have the option of fully streamlining this. So you could round off the forward edge and taper the trailing edge, and you can either leave the tip edge straight, or you could round or taper that as well. What I'm going to do is just do a rounding of the leading edge there, and I'm going to leave the other edges square. And that's a good compromise between aerodynamics and strength there. I'm going to start with some 100 grit sandpaper here, and first of all just sand this to remove the scorch marks. Okay, now I didn't get all that, but we're going to be doing some more sanding yet. Next, still with the 100 grit, I'm just going to do all the edges. Doesn't require a lot. Again, mainly just enough to get the scorch marks off. Now I do have to be careful here on the leading edge that I don't damage that tab. And now to start rounding this over, I'm going to continue using the 100 grit at first here, and I'm just going to knock down the edges. So on both sides here, we're just going to flatten out that edge, the corner edge there. And again, be mindful of this. Alright, and then continue sanding and rolling my wrist here. This will give us a rounded edge. Okay, now the way this is going to work is the main body tube kind of sticks out over this, and so if you don't get this, and I'm actually not rounding right up in here just so I don't break that. It's already got a little chip out of there. Okay, and I'm going to start checking this in cross section. I'm more rounded on this side than on this side, so I need to put a little more effort on that one. Okay, it's still a little off center there. The other thing we can do is watch the stripe here where it does have the scorch marks from the laser cutting. And once we get that stripe gone, that means we're probably pretty close to done there. Okay, that's bringing us pretty close to back into center there. Okay, we got just a little bit of the middle stripe left there, and now I'm going to switch over to 150 grit sandpaper here. Alright, then I'm going to come back, sand the edges again. And then do the faces. Next, I'm moving up to a 220 grit, and we'll just continue doing the same thing here. Alright, and then finally I'm going to use a 320 grit to make this extra smooth. Some people would go even up to a 400 grit. I think this is going to be fine. But if you want really, really smooth fins, you're certainly welcome to do that. Okay, so there is one fin finished. And now we have 5 more to do, but I'll do those off camera and then come back. Here I have all of my fins shaped and sanded, and the instructions suggest going ahead and using a filler or primer on these at this point. And they also suggest masking the root edge with 1/2 inch of masking tape. I'm not going to do quite that much. What I will do here is take some masking tape and put it on one edge like this. I think this may actually be too thick. Let me go to a different one here. Because I just want to cover the area where the glue and the fillets are going to be applied, and leave the rest open here. So I'm just taking a strip here and just putting it across the root edge like this. I'll do this to the other 5 fins as well off camera, and then once I've got these on, I'm going to spray the fins with a filling sandable primer. Now you can also use things like sanding sealer. You could use a clear varathane if you wanted to, but something to finish filling in the grain. Now, as I said, I actually sanded these really well. You could probably just prime and spray paint these if you wanted to as well. Right now the primer on the fins is drying, and while that's happening we can go ahead and start assembling the main motor mount here. So the first thing we need to do, according to the instructions, is to put a mark inside this tube at 3.5 inches up. Now there's no way I'm going to get a mark 3.5 inches up on the outside. I think what they mean is to put it on the outside of the tube. So here I'm going to take my ruler and I'm just going to mark the inside of the main motor mount tube here on one end as aft, so I'll get this turned around later. And then I'm going to make a mark here at 3.5 inches from the aft end. It's going to be right here. Okay, now if we take a motor casing here, so this is an E, and that would stick out there about 1/4 inch or 5 to 6 millimeters there, which is what we want. But to help us get this engine block in where it needs to be, I'm going to go ahead and mark my motor casing here. At 1/4 inch from its aft end, and I can use this then to put the engine block up where it belongs. The other thing I can do to help with this is I can take an applicator like this and my wood glue. Alright, and the first thing I'm going to do is measure on my ruler again at 3.5, and I'm going to put my thumb down here, so that's 3.5 inches from the tip of the applicator, keeping my thumbnail on there. I'm going to go ahead and dip it in the glue. Alright, now I'm going to put this in the tube without touching the sides until my thumbnail hits there, and now I'm going to go all the way around, and that should apply my glue evenly. Okay, now we'll go ahead and, oops, almost try and flop the glue over there. Alright, now we'll go ahead and we'll place the ring inside there, and then take the spent motor case, push that forward until we get to that mark, and immediately take that out, so if there is any excess glue we don't glue this inside. Okay, now we do have an engine clip here, and this is supposed to go at that same mark, but we don't want to put this on until after the fins go on, because the fins are used to align this properly. So I'm just going to stick the clip away for the moment. Now something else we can do, and we need to make some marks on here to do this, will be to put the centering rings on this. Now I think this is a typo. Okay, so it has a mark at 3.875 inches, that's 3 7/8 from one end, which would be the aft end, so it'd be down here with our other mark. Okay, but when we get down here, it says place the ring at the 3.375 inch or 3 3/8 mark. And so I think that 8 should be a 3 or vice versa. I'm going to take a look here. We can use the fins as guides, but unfortunately my fins are drying right now. So as soon as that dries, I'm just going to take a quick measurement of the root edge of one of those fins and see which measurement we actually need. So here's one of the fins, and it's half done with its primer. Alright, but if we measure this from the trailing edge up here to where that tab is, that would be almost 3 3/8 of an inch. Okay, our engine hook here, which is supposed to go up next to one of the fins, that would be at the 3 1/2 inch mark, and that's about where these are showing. Okay, now these holes here are wide enough that they'll probably accept just a little bit of the leading edge on there. So I am going to go with the 3 3/8 inch mark, and we'll hope everything works out well. Here I have the primer applied to my fins, and so we can just use one of these as a guide now to figure out exactly where our our centering ring goes here. Okay, so coming back, I'm going to first try just doing the mark that we made for the motor retainer. So that would put it right about there. Okay, and then if we put in a fin, okay, that actually does go a little bit further aft, so our mark there is on the forward edge. Okay, so what I'm going to do then is go ahead and check the placement here of our engine block. So this should be able to let me cut a little slot here. It's actually right below my mark, and that is where my engine hook is going to go, like that. Okay, now they actually show putting this on after the fins, but if this is going to be over it, we need to put this in first. So now what I can do is go ahead and put my centering ring on, and even with that motor clip there, if I'm not in one of the notches, there's still enough room for this to slide. Okay, so we'll bring this up, and it's supposed to go adjacent to a fin. Okay, so we can do it like that. And here, since they call for epoxy, I'm going to mix up a little bit of 5-minute epoxy here and then come back. Here I've made up some 5-minute epoxy, and it's a good idea to wear gloves when you're working with this because repeated exposure can result in allergic-like reactions. Alright, now I'm going to put my aft ring on, but I'm going to put it below the line here so that I push into it. Alright, so I'm going to put my epoxy right about where that line is. Maybe just a little bit aft, because we want the ring to push itself, or to get pushed up into the epoxy, but we don't want a lot of epoxy in the holes. So we'll have to make sure and clean those out, and then now we're just going to push this forward right until it reaches the top of our engine clip there. Now it's just a matter of making it perpendicular. Now they also suggest using a little bit of epoxy for about the first inch or so, inch and a half along here, just to anchor that down a bit. Alright, I'm going to put a little piece of tape on there temporarily just to hold that down and straight, which is currently not. Alright, this guy's sliding all over the place here. Alright, now I'm going to temporarily put on the forward ring just to allow this to balance a bit. Okay, and then we're just going to let that sit and harden. Come back in about 5 minutes. It doesn't look like we've got an excessive amount of epoxy in any of the holes. So when this sets up, we'll come back and we'll do the forward ring. My centering ring has had time to set. And the forward centering ring here goes at a 1/4 inch, so you can make a little mark 1/4 inch from the top, or you can just estimate it. The exact position is not critical. And then we're going to move on to the fins. Now for each fin we need to use a little bit of epoxy, and what I recommend is using 5-minute epoxy and just making up a few drops of it at a time, as it won't take much to do each fin. So here I've made up a small amount of epoxy. I'm going to move that forward disc down just a little bit. Okay, and then I'm just going to make a ring here at about a 1/4 inch. I'm going to leave about 1/8 inch exposed at the top of the tube. And you want to make a wide enough band of the epoxy that the ring has to go through it as we push it forward. Okay, so we're just going to push this up. You don't need to worry about alignment of those 2 holes. Those are going to be for the anchor of the shock cord. Okay, and it's pushed itself into a nice little fillet there. And with my leftover epoxy, I'm going to go ahead and put a fillet on the other side of that as well. Okay, and once again I'm going to let that harden. When I come back we'll start doing the fins, and I'm going to prep the epoxy for that. Now for our first fin, we're just going to do a dry fit check again. Okay, I'm going to start out with the one that goes next to our engine clip, so that should just fit right in there. Okay, and then we're going to glue this right to the engine mount tube here, and the aft edge of the fin should line up with the motor mount. Okay, so that all looks good. I'm going to do each of the holes in turn just to make sure we don't have anything blocking them. If you got a little too much epoxy in one of these, you can simply cut it away with a hobby knife, which that one needs it. So does that one. Okay, so before we glue this, we're going to go ahead and just trim this out a little bit. Alright, and this isn't taking much, it's just kind of shaving off a little bit of epoxy that got in there. Okay, and now I'm ready with my 5-minute epoxy to attach the first fin. Okay, so for this step we're just going to put it here on the root edge. And it doesn't want to be sloppy, but you do want a nice continuous bead here. And then all around the little tab there. Okay, then we're going to go ahead and put this right into this hole next to our clip. Now I want to be careful here that we don't get any on the clip, and it's trying to do that. Alright, now I just need to make sure that it stays perpendicular there. So I'm going to hold this for a few minutes while it hardens up there, and then we'll kind of move that out of the way. Alright, so once this hardens in roughly 5 minutes, I can go on to the next one and make my way all the way around. It's probably going to help with alignment if you do these opposite each other. So just did this fin, the second one will be opposite to that, and then the third one I'll shift over and then go opposite, etc. Okay, however you want to do your own pattern, that's fine. But I'll do the rest of these off camera. While I'm waiting for the epoxy on the fins to harden, I'm going to turn my attention to the body tube and nose cone here. When I go to paint this, I'm not going to use the color scheme that's shown on the box, which has an all yellow body tube and motor cluster and then a black nose cone. Instead, I'm going to use the colors of the college where I work, which are a navy and scarlet, or something close, a blue and a red of some kind. And then most of the body is probably going to be white. So I can paint this ahead of time, and what I'll do is apply some white primer to this and then overcoat that with a gloss white. I don't worry too much about filling in spirals here. If you want to do that, you can start with a filling sandable primer and then go to the white primer and white paint, or whichever paint you're going to use. For the nose cone, this will also probably be white, but I might go with one of the other school colors there. Now, when this was made, we've got some obvious seam here that's uneven. Less so on this side, but it still has a little. So I'm going to sand this, but I'm going to wet sand it. Now you can dry sand it without any problem, but I like the results I get by wet sanding. So just use some wet dry sandpaper, and I just moisten the sandpaper, do a little bit of sanding, re-moisten it. And part of the thing that helps with is it takes the sanded particles out of the sandpaper and rinses them away. And then when I'm all done, I can rinse this whole thing because the water's not going to affect the plastic. Take it out, see where I need to do more. Alright, so I'm going to do that off camera, and then we'll come back and see how it looks. Here's the nose cone after sanding, and you can still see a little bit of the seam here on that side. Most of it's completely gone here on this side. Now what I did was start with 220 grit sandpaper and sanded mainly around those seams, and then I sanded the entire surface with 320 grit sandpaper. Now, depending on just how smooth you want your nose cone to be, you can stop here. If you want to fill in these seams here, I recommend using plastic model contour putty. This is made by several different outfits. This one's Testers, but you just smooth this stuff in and let it dry, and then you can sand it, and then the idea is it'll fill in the grooves there. Now, something that came to my attention while I was doing this is that this is either polypropylene or polyethylene, which are nice strong plastics for nose cones, but they're not easily paintable. Paint does not like to stick to those two. And so doing this sanding, even if you didn't need to sand out seams or something like this, will help your paint stick to it. Another thing you can do that will help paint stick is before you do your regular primer of whatever you like to use, apply a coat of what's called a universal binding primer, or I think that's right. And what it does is it gives an additional surface for the paint to stick to. Alright, so I just noticed I missed a little bit of the seam here and a little bit down here. So I'm going to give this a final sanding, and then I'm going to start priming and later painting it. And the same thing with my body tube here. It does not need the universal binding primer, or bonding primer as actually what it's called. So it'll just get primed and painted. Now we're ready to assemble the external cluster motor mount tubes. So these are all of the 18 millimeter engine mounts. And then we'll also have these thrust rings here, so you should have 6 of each. Now here again, the instructions are calling for us to mark the inside of a tube, and that's just really not possible. What I'm going to do instead is first take an expended motor casing here, and I'm going to mark it from the aft end 6 millimeters, or 1/4 of an inch. It's going to be right there. That's how far it should hang out. Okay. Now in the instructions, what they want us to do is put glue down and then push this down till we get that 1.5 inch mark. Alright, like I said, that's really not very practical. Instead, I'm going to use an applicator, and if you don't have a cotton one like this, you can just use a small dowel or stick or waste piece of balsa. Alright, now I'm going to use the 1.5 inch that they talked about, but I'm going to use it to mark my applicator. So I'm going to put my thumbnail here at 1.5 inch. Now they say to use epoxy or super glue for this. We're doing paper on paper, and so actually the best thing to use is wood glue. If you want to do the others, you can, but this will actually give you a stronger bond than cyanoacrylate will, and it's a whole lot less expensive than epoxy. Alright, now what I'll do is just put this in the forward end of that motor mount tube till I hit my thumbnail there. Alright, I'm going to smear it around the inside, bring that back out. Now I'm going to take the engine block and I'm putting it in the aft end of that tube. And I'm going to take my spent casing here and I'm going to push that forward till I reach my mark, and I immediately pull that out again. Now let's see if we can get that seen. So now you can see that down there. The ring has been pushed up into the glue and it's formed its own fillet there. And if we look down the back side there, there's no glue running down there, and that's what we want. Okay, so I'm going to repeat this 5 more times with the other tubes and blocks off camera and then come back. Now this is the last one, so once again here, we'll get some glue, get my mark on the thumbnail there, squish that around. Alright, put the block up the aft end and then push it into place with the motor casing. I'm going to let all of these dry now for at least 15 minutes. While the cluster mounts are drying, we need to come back to the body tube here. Now, I had already put a layer of primer on this, and then I realized that we still need to put the launch lugs on first. So we need to draw a line all the way down the length of this. And the easiest way is just to go to a door frame and use that, or if you've got a piece of angle aluminum. You can also use this thing here. This is a tube marking guide that Estes makes. Now the body tube is actually longer than my tube guide, so I'll have to do this in 2 sections. But all we need is a line that runs all the way down. Okay, and let's see if I've done it already. Nope. Okay, so we're going to mark one end of this aft on the inside just so we don't get turned around and confused. And then 3 inches from the forward end, we will make a mark here. Alright, and that is where the upper launch lug will go. The lower launch lug will be down here flush with the tube. here are our launch lugs. And since I did put some primer on this, I'm going to sand right around where they're going to go. So I'm just going to take, this is some 150 grit sandpaper. This is the aft end. So I'm just going to scrape some here. And if you need to, you can redraw that line, so that's not a big deal. Okay, and then up here at the 3-inch mark, I'm also going to sand just below that. Okay, and then I'll do the same thing on the launch lugs themselves. So where they're going to attach, I'm just going to roughen that up a little bit. And this will just give us a better surface for the glue to adhere to. Now the instructions want us to use epoxy to put these on and then add epoxy fillets to it. Since we're going to add epoxy fillets, I'm instead going to use some gel type super glue here, cyanoacrylate, just because it'll set up really quickly and I don't want to worry about these falling over. I'm going to put the forward one on first since it's got a line on either side. And yeah, okay, and that's where I put the sanding area. So here I'm going to take some thick super glue, just put a little bead on there, and then apply that to our line. Okay, now as we look down from the top, this should be parallel with the line and running with it. Alright, and then I'm going to sight down the entire rocket and make sure that it is lined up with my line and with the rocket body tube itself. And now I'm going to let that just sit there for a few minutes to harden, and then I'll do the same thing with the aft one. The glue on the forward launch lug has set enough that we can work with the aft one now. And this is going to go on in the same manner, so I'm just going to run this along where I'd roughen the surface. And then we're going to put that on our line back here. Now this should be flush with the body tube. Alright, and now we're going to sight down along it. This should be directly in line with the forward one. So it should look like a gun sight as you're going through. So that aft one should also be lined up with the tube and the line. And when it is, that forward one should be centered within it. And it is. Now in the instructions, they actually have us doing this part after we insert the fin can and motor mounts, but since we had nothing better to do, I did it this way. The thing to remember though is when we go to put this all together, we want the engine clip to line up just offset with this. So use the same gap, so you'll have two fins coming up here that has the engine clip in it. The launch lug should go between those two fins. Here the fin assembly is all glued together, and we are ready to put the cluster mounts on, and these will simply fit in between every two fins there. Now there's one special case here where we've got our engine clip, and on mine I actually got a little bit of a bigger gap here. It wasn't intentional, but it actually works to my advantage, because what we want to do when we glue this one in is, if possible, leave a little gap here. Don't put any fillets in that part, and that'll allow us to do a little more clearance with the engine clip there. Okay. Now the instructions call for epoxy for all of this. Keep in mind though, the biggest motor that's going to go into this is a D, and that's if you're using composites. So really this part can be built like any other model rocket. So I'm going to use wood glue to do the initial fastening. Now they do want us to put in fillets here, and there you can use epoxy or wood glue. Really, it's up to you, because the epoxy on these is overkill. And it's going to add weight to it. Alright, so I'm going to do mine. I'm going to do that one last. So I'm just going to come over here, and where we need the glue is basically right along where the unmasked, or the masked areas were. Alright, so we're going to put some glue along here. In a minute here, I'm going to use a applicator to kind of move it upward. So this is going to also make fillets for the fins there. All right, now here I'm going to take a cotton applicator and just move that up so the glue is right along that line. Okay, and also we have glue all along the fins there, making a fillet. Okay, and then I'm also going to get it up here. Now we may want to use some epoxy right around where the forward end of each engine mount goes, because that will be exposed to hot gases from the motors. Alright, now once more, check and make sure that you've got the forward end forward. You should have the engine block up here. Alright, now we're just going to put that down inside there. Okay, if we look at it on the end, alright, we should have contact on both fins and contact with the main body tube there. Now this does require a little bit of patience. If you're using wood glue, let that go for 5 minutes to 10 minutes before you do the next one. If you're using 5-minute epoxy, you're going to wait for about the same amount of time. Here I'm putting on the next tube, and if we look here, you'll notice that we've got a gap here, and that means I had two of my fins too close together here. All right, and it probably happened while they were epoxying, and one of them shifted a little bit. All right, so I'm gluing this in as best I can, and for now, I'll just ignore this. I may come back and fill this in with epoxy a little bit later on. But structurally, it's still glued to the two fins there. It is glued a little better toward the front, all right, so this gap is not even. All right, but aside from breaking the fin and trying to redo that, this is the best we can do here. Now, if you end up with a case where none of these fit right, you just had a really bad day, you can fly this without any of these tubes, to tell you the truth. You can just fly it with a mid-power engine in here. Okay, but I'm going to keep going on around here, and so I'll do these next three in turn as the glue dries, and then when we get to the engine clip one here, I'll come back and do that with you. Here I'm down to my final cluster mount tube, and this is going to go along here. And so, as I mentioned, I'm going to treat this one just a little bit differently. So I'm going to be careful not to glue any of the clip there, except way up here in front. Alright, so here I'm going to put glue on both sides up to about here. So we'll still have something to grab onto for that motor mount tube. Alright, but then for the rest of it, we'll only put it on one side here. Okay, and one last check, making sure this is going on the right way. And I'm just going to squish it down in there. Alright, now if you look here, you can see my imperfections. So these aren't completely evenly spaced, but they're pretty close. Alright, and now I'm going to let this completely dry for an hour or two before going on to the next step. I mentioned I was starting to do the nose cone and the upper part of the rocket painting here earlier in the video. And so this is what it looks like after it's been sprayed with 2 coats of universal bonding primer. And over that, before sanding, I've put on 2 coats of filling sandable primer. And so it's got a little bit of a rough toothiness to it, and that's what we want. We're going to sand that down, but that's going to help the actual paint bind to this a whole lot better than it would if we were trying to spray directly onto this type of plastic. So I'm going to go take this and do a little bit of wet sanding, and then I'll come back. I'm ready to put epoxy fillets on my launch lugs here, and if I have left over, I'll start in on the cluster motor mount as well. I'm using 5-minute epoxy, and you'll want to have some paper towels handy, some tight rubber gloves, and also a little bit of alcohol. Rubbing alcohol works fine. And what I'm going to do here is just lay in a little bit of epoxy along each of my launch lugs here. Now I'm going to do 1 launch lug at a time, but we should be able to complete it here in less than 5 minutes. And if you want really heavy launch lugs, do this multiple times. Don't try and do it with one great big blob of epoxy. It'll just make a big mess. In fact, that's probably too much there. Alright, now what I'm going to do is my glove here, I'm going to put some alcohol on it. And what this does is it makes it so the glove doesn't stick to the epoxy. And then I'm going to do this just like I would a regular model rocket fillet. Is I'm just going to smooth these in with a finger. Okay, and you can actually come through here if you get some stuff where you don't want it. Just take some tissues here and wipe that away. If you got excess alcohol there, you can wipe it up too. Alright, and you just want to let this harden in a horizontal position. Okay, and we still have working time left on our epoxy, so I'm just going to turn this around. And I'll do the other one. I'll use a little less epoxy this time, because those were really gooey fillets. Okay, and once again, get a little alcohol there. And smooth those in. Just like that. Okay, I'm going to set that aside to harden. Alright, so on the cluster and fins here, we can do the same thing. Now for these, I would suggest just doing 1 motor mount at a time. And just kind of let the epoxy ooze down in there. Okay, I'll probably have to make up some more epoxy for this particular motor mount. But we'll get one side done here. And you may want to have a little bit here around the forward end of the tube to seal that off. But don't get it up here on the centering ring. Alright, now just like we did with the launch lug, I'll use a wetted with alcohol finger here. and just smooth that in. Now that's got some gaps in it there, which means I didn't have enough epoxy. Alright, I'll just let that harden and then put some more over it. And I'll do the same thing all the way around this off camera. Here I have all of the epoxy fillets applied, and they're all pretty much the same except for when we get over here to the motor retainer. That fillet only goes about halfway down and allows the movement here still of the engine clip. I'm going to let this completely cure overnight, and then we'll start painting.